Have you ever looked at the woman you love and realized she's not really there anymore? Have you ever sat next to her at dinner, heard her speak, nodded along, and still felt like she was 1,000 miles away? Have you ever rolled over in bed to say goodnight only to realize she already left the room in her heart? She didn't slam the door. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't say, "I'm done." She just stopped laughing at your jokes, stopped reaching for your hand, stopped telling you about the little things, her frustrations, her dreams, her day. It was subtle, so subtle you missed it. You thought she was just tired. You thought maybe she needed space. You told yourself, "We're fine." But the truth, she was already halfway gone. Most men don't lose the woman they love in one big explosion. They lose her in 1,000 missed moments. As Jung insightfully put it, when the soul isn't heard, it doesn't scream, it fades. She didn't stop loving you. She just stopped trying to be felt by someone who never really saw her. You missed the signal, and the question is, will you miss it again? In this video, I'm going to share with you the signs I missed, so that maybe you don't have to learn the hard way. Let's begin. We were taught to pay attention to the loud moments, the raised voices, the slammed doors, the dramatic exits, but no one warned us about the quiet ones, the way she stops saying good morning with warmth, the way she listens but doesn't lean in, the way her "I'm fine" doesn't mean fine anymore, and you can feel it, even if she never explains. Most men don't miss these signals because they're careless. They miss them because no one ever taught them to see subtle shifts in emotion as real communication. In our world, we're taught to read logic, not tone, to respond to facts, not feelings, to move forward, not pause and observe. So when she starts withdrawing, emotionally, physically, spiritually, we interpret it as a phase, a mood, or even worse. Nothing at all, but a woman rarely leaves all at once. She leaves by degrees. She checks out of one conversation, then another. She stops sharing what made her laugh that day. She stops asking what made you frustrated. And then one day, you look at her and realize you're still in the relationship, but she isn't. One of Jung's more haunting truths is this: what remains unconscious will quietly dictate your life, and you'll mistake it for fate. But what if it wasn't fate? What if it was just a series of small moments you didn't notice? This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about learning to see differently, because the sooner you recognize the early signals, the more chance you have to reconnect before the silence becomes permanent. Let's look at the first sign most men overlook, and how you can respond before it's too late. It started with something simple. She stopped texting me in the middle of the day. Nothing dramatic, just the absence of what used to be there. We used to check in with each other, a quick "thinking of you," or a photo of something she found funny at work. But slowly, the messages faded, and when I brought it up, she smiled and said, "I've just been busy." I believed her, of course I did, but then it was more than texts. She stopped telling me about her co-workers, stopped sharing the little frustrations that once made up our end-of-day conversations. She didn't ask what I thought about things anymore. Dinner, plans, weekend trips, even small things like what movie to watch. She just shrugged and said, "Whatever you want." At first I thought she was being easygoing. Later I realized she was letting go. Jung believed that when growth ends, withdrawal quietly begins, and that's what she was doing. She wasn't angry, she wasn't cold, she was quietly pulling her roots out of the ground, not to leave today, but because she had already stopped believing there was anything left to grow into. Here's what most men miss. When she stops sharing the small things, it's never about the things. It's about emotional real estate. She's testing whether her inner world still matters to you, and when it goes unacknowledged for too long, she stops opening the door. I used to think relationships ended with betrayal or a big blow-up, but the truth is, they end like a song fading out on the radio. Not abrupt, just no longer playing. And it's those small things, the ones that once made her feel like your teammate, your best friend, your favorite voice in the room. Those are what begin to disappear first. One day she doesn't tell you about the weird customer she helped, then she stops mentioning the new girl at work. Then she doesn't ask how your meeting went, not because she's rude, but because she's no longer emotionally invested in the answer. These aren't gaps in the conversation, they're fractures in connection, and if you ignore them, they spread. Have you ever looked back on a relationship and realized she started pulling away long before the final goodbye, long before the fight, long before the "we need to talk" moment? If so, you're not blind, you're just not trained to notice how women exit, not with doors, but with details. So pay attention to the small things she stops saying, because one day the silence will be all that's left, and by then, she's already gone. There was a time when she looked at me like I was the only man in the room, like I was the story she wanted to hear, not just background noise, her eyes used to meet mine and stay there, soft, warm, alive, but slowly. That look changed. She still looked at me, sure, but the gaze didn't land. It passed like I was furniture, familiar but invisible. It started with little things. We'd talk over dinner, and her eyes would drift to her phone, or to the window. During movies, she'd sit next to me, but not with me. The spark in her glance, the one that once lit up just because I walked into the room, it wasn't there anymore. And then, it was her touch. She used to be tactile, affectionate in the small ways. She'd squeeze my hand when she was excited, brush my shoulder when she walked past me in the kitchen, run her fingers along my back when she leaned in to hug me from behind. But that started fading too. Not abruptly. Gradually. One day I realized I couldn't remember the last time she reached for me first. We still slept in the same bed, but even that changed. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. Just stillness, her back to me, not angry, just elsewhere. And I know now that was her asking for safety, not in words, in absence. As Jung observed, the emotions we bury often return disguised as distance. When a woman pulls back her body, it's almost always because she doesn't feel emotionally seen. She's not rejecting you. She's grieving the loss of emotional intimacy. She's asking a question without speaking. Can I still be vulnerable with you? And we men, we often miss that. We take her distance as attitude, or worse, as disinterest. But it's deeper than that. It's defense. Touch is language. Eye contact is presence. And when both begin to vanish, it's not just behavior. It's her nervous system calling for safety. Have you ever reached out for someone and felt their body go still before you even touched them? Have you ever looked into her eyes and realized she wasn't there anymore? If so, brother, that was the signal, and you're not weak for missing it. You're just waking up to it now. The stoic man doesn't panic. He doesn't force affection. He doesn't demand closeness. He becomes a steady presence, safe ground, because sometimes when she pulls away, she's not testing you. She's hoping you'll hold the space long enough for her to return. So don't react, don't retreat. Just stay. Not with pressure, but with presence. Because when she feels your stillness, she might remember what it felt like to rest inside it, and when she reaches for you again, it won't be out of obligation. It'll be because she finally feels safe, not because you pushed, but because you noticed. Have you ever felt this? That moment where she's right beside you, but somehow already gone? If yes, comment. I felt this, so others know they're not alone. There's a moment when her voice changes. She still answers your questions, still shows up, still functions. But something's missing. You say, "How was your day?" She says, "Fine." You suggest a movie. She shrugs, "Whatever." You ask, "Is everything okay?" She replies, "I don't know." It's not anger, it's not attitude, it's not even coldness, it's flatness. A kind of numb that doesn't slam the door. It just closes it softly and walks away. At first I thought she was just tired. Maybe she had a long week. Maybe she didn't sleep well. Maybe she just needed space. But days passed, then weeks. The conversations got shorter, the silences got longer, and even when we talked, it felt like I was talking at her, not with her. Jung wrote that when a person loses access to feeling, they begin to detach from life itself, and that's what I saw in her. Not rebellion, not resistance, but retreat. She wasn't trying to start a fight. She was trying not to feel more disappointment. Flat responses are not lack of opinion. They're emotional armor. They're a woman's way of saying, I've said too much before and it didn't matter, so now I say nothing. Have you ever had a woman go quiet mid-sentence because she already knew you wouldn't really listen? Have you ever looked across the table and felt like the spark was there in body, but not in spirit? If so, that's not drama. That's disconnection. The stoic man doesn't chase the spark. He slows down and looks for the source of the numbness. He asks himself, when did she stop feeling safe enough to bring her full voice? And then he listens, without fixing, without defending, just listens, because sometimes the shortest answers hold the most truth, and the man who learns to hear what isn't being said becomes the man she finally feels heard by, not because he argued, not because he won, but because he finally showed up, not to correct her, but to understand her, and that's when her voice begins to return. Not louder, just real again. What if she never meant to leave, but felt like she had to disappear just to be seen? It's easy to blame her silence, her distance, her withdrawal, but sometimes what looks like coldness is actually grief, not loud grief, quiet grief, the kind that comes from years of not being felt, even while standing right in front of you. I remember talking to my friend Bill. He got divorced 2 years ago. He said, I didn't see it coming. She just stopped talking one day, and I thought, it was stress, but looking back, she stopped years before. I just didn't want to see it. That stuck with me, because I realized I was doing the same, and then came the dream. I was standing in front of a mirror, but my reflection wasn't mine. It was her, my wife, looking back at me with eyes full of sadness. She didn't say a word, just looked and disappeared. That morning I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, because I knew she was already halfway gone. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine soul inside every man. When a man is disconnected from his own inner feeling world, he can't recognize the emotional life of the woman next to him. He sees behavior, but he doesn't feel the signal beneath it, and that's how men lose women they still love. Not through cruelty, but through blindness. She didn't leave because she stopped loving you. She left because loving you started to feel like speaking to a wall. But here's the good news. The anima, the feeling function, can wake up, and when it does, a man begins to hear with more than his ears. He sees with more than his eyes. He feels what she can't always say. And in that awareness, something shifts. You don't just keep her. You meet her not with solutions, not with strategy, but with presence. Because to truly love a woman, especially a woman who is fading, is to notice her soul before she walks away with it. That is your turning point, not to win her back, but to show her, I finally see you. If you've made it this far, maybe something in you already knew that she wasn't being distant to hurt you. She was being distant because she didn't feel held, and maybe for the first time you're starting to see the pattern. Not her mood swings, not her silence, but your absence, emotional, attentive, present. But here's the most important thing. It's not too late. You don't need to go back in time. You just need to show up fully now. You don't need perfect words. You don't need grand gestures. You just need to be willing to notice the quiet signals before they become goodbye. So tonight, don't ask, are you okay? Instead, ask, what part of you have I stopped seeing? And when she answers, even if it's just a look, a tear, a pause, don't rush it. Don't fix it. Just stay. Because presence heals more than solutions ever could. If this video stirred something in you, even a little, leave a comment. I see her now. Say it for the woman you almost lost. Say it for the woman still standing next to you. Say it for the man you're becoming, because when you see her fully, she doesn't need to fade. She gets to stay.